I'm going to start talking about the Mitteler Rebbe today. Every Chabad Rebbe has at least 2 days, right? His birthday and his yahrzeit. And most of them also have a third day, a Chag HaGeula, right? The Alter Rebbe was born, Chayel, he passed away, Chav Dal Tevis, Chag HaGeula, Yud Kislev. Tzemach Tzedek was born, Chav Tes Elul, he passed away, Yud Gimel Nissen, and he was released from prison, nobody knows when, but it was sometime in Elul, in Tav Reish Gimel. The Reb Marash was born Beis Rivka, he passed away Yud Gimel Tishrei, and he was never in jail. The Rebbe Rashab was born, he was born Chav Cheshvan, he passed away Beis Nissen. For a third day from the Rebbe Rashab, you have Achei Temimim, Tezvovel, and so on. The Friedrich Rebbe was a little complicated. Why? He was born Yud Beis Tammuz, he passed away Yud Shvat, and he was released from prison Yud Beis Tammuz. So yeah. The Mitteler Rebbe, his whole life is crunched into 2 days, one after the other. He was born Tes Kislev, passed away Tes Kislev, and released from prison Yud Kislev. So the Mitteler Rebbe really doesn't have 2 days. It's all crunched into one. What's more interesting, more telling, is that the Mitteler Rebbe was, Yud Kislev, when the Mitteler Rebbe was released from prison, was a Sunday. It was a Sunday. While the Mitteler Rebbe was being held, it's a complicated story, and I'm going to tell it now, Bariches, he was allowed to say Chassidus. The Mitteler Rebbe's arrest was not like the Alter Rebbe, didn't put him in jail. They invited him to come to Petersburg for discussions, because there were accusations that the Mitteler Rebbe was spending money in a way which was illegal, not correct, not legal. And but the Mitteler was allowed to have Chassidim, had a minyan 3 times a day, 3 times a week he said Chassidus. So Shabbos afternoon, Tes Kislev, the Mitteler Rebbe was actually saying a maimed, and we know the name of the maimed. The maimed is Ata Kodesh V'Shimcha Kodesh. Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad. The maimed was the tefillah of Mincha Shabbos. You know, Shabbos, every tefillah is a different kedusha. Yom Tov, all the tefillahs are the same kedusha. The middle bracha of Yom Tov, it always starts the same way, Ata V'Chatonu. Shabbos, Friday night, it starts Ata Kidashta. Shabbos morning, it starts Yismach Moshe. Musaf, which is different, starts Tikanta Shabbos, and Mincha starts Ata Echad. Each tefillah is a different, the right word is a different kiddush, it's a different kedusha. So the Mitteler Rebbe was saying Chassidus on Ata Echad. While he was saying Chassidus, they came in to tell him that he's free to go, but they didn't want to interrupt him, so they left him there. By the time he finished saying Chassidus, Shabbos was over, it was already Sunday, and then they gave him the Besura. So the truth is, even his Geula is Tes Kislev. He was born Tes Kislev, he passed away Tes Kislev. If he hadn't been saying Chassidus, they would have told him he's free to go on Tes Kislev. They delayed it because they did not want to interrupt the Maimid. So they had to tell him after he finished, it was already night, it was already Motzei Shabbos. So therefore the Chag HaGeula, the Mitteler Rebbe is Yud Kislev. And in the Chabad tradition, Yud Kislev we don't say Tachnon. We say Tachnon on yahrzeits. We say Tachnon on yahrzeits. The Rebbe once asked the Friedrich Rebbe why. In non-Chabad Chassidus, in Polish Chassidus, in every yahrzeit of a tzaddik, you don't say Tachnon, based on the idea that the yahrzeit of a tzaddik is a Yom Tov, because the neshama has an aliyah with the whole business, which you already have in Tanya. The Rebbe in Tanya explains why the yahrzeit of a tzaddik is a Yom Tov. So the Rebbe asked the Friedrich Rebbe why Chabad doesn't follow the minig of Chassidei Poland and not say Tachnon on the yahrzeit. So the Friedrich Rebbe told the Rebbe, this is the quote, the Rebbe repeated this by Fabrengenischen, when then is da a bessere Zeit sagen Tachnon? When then is there a better time to say Tachnon on the yahrzeit? Meaning, I understand that there's a mile in a yahrzeit, it's a Yom Tov, and therefore there's a reason not to say Tachnon. But when is the best time for a person to do tshuva, if not on the yahrzeit of a tzaddik, when you have Yisayidus tshuva? In other words, maybe there's a reason not to say Tachnon, but it's offset by the benefits that a person, when you have a special day and you do tshuva, you do a special tshuva. And Tachnon is not just words and banging your chest. Tachnon is tshuva, it's vidui, it's confession. So the Rebbe said, there's no better time to say Tachnon, which means to do tshuva, than on a yahrzeit, and we therefore say Tachnon on yahrzeits. So, but Chag HaGeula we don't say Tachnon. Yud Kislev is the Mitteler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula, we don't say Tachnon Yud Kislev. Tes Kislev we do, Yud Kislev we don't. And just to give you the picture, and this is my opinion, but I believe it very firmly, there are 4 days that Lubavitcher Chassidim do not say Tachnon. Number 1, Yud Tes and Chav Kislev, it's the Alter Rebbe's Chag HaGeula. And by him also, there's 2 days of Yom Tov because of the Maaseh with the Misnagid. Yud Kislev, Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, also 2 days, and also for the same reason that the offices were closed on Tuesday, so he had to come in the next day official, so the Chag HaGeula happens over 2 days. And Chamisha B'Tevis, Hey Tevis, which the Rebbe called in Tov Nun Beis, Chamisha. The real name of Hey Tevis is Chamisha B'Tevis. In Nun Beis, 2 months before the stroke, the Fabrengen of Hey Tevis, the entire Fabrengen, the Rebbe said Chamisha B'Tevis. And I was standing next to a very special man. He's younger than I am, he was a bocher. And he taps me on the shoulder, he says, the Yom Tov has a new name. It's not Hey Tevis. If the Rebbe had not had a stroke, we would all call Hey Tevis Chamisha B'Tevis, because the next year they would have said again Chamisha B'Tevis. But in Tov Nun Beis, the Rebbe said maybe 5 times, maybe more, that the Hey Tevis is Chamisha B'Tevis. This is the Rebbe's Chag HaGeula, and there's no question in my mind that you shouldn't say Tachnun, because it's a Pada B'Shalom Nafshi Mikrovli, just like any of the others. So next week, today's Beis, right? So next week, Monday and Tuesday, Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev are the Mitteler Rebbe's days. Beis Kislev is his birthday and is his Talkas Hilula. And Yud Kislev is the Chag HaGeula, the Mitteler Rebbe. So I want to talk to you about the Mitteler Rebbe's redemption. In other words, I don't want to tell you about his whole life, because I did that in the last 2 years here. I want to talk to you about the Mitteler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula, Mitteler Rebbe's redemption, the end of his life. The Mitteler Rebbe was redeemed from prison, according to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rishimis, 1 year before he passed away. Based on documents that have recently been discovered, it seems, and some people get very upset when you say it, but it seems to me that he was released from prison 2 years before he passed away. Not he passed away Peches. He passed away 1827. We used to say, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he passed away, he was released from prison, Tafresh Pei Zayin, 1826. But the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, we're not sure. And Lapel from the documents, it's mashma that he was released from prison in Tafresh Pei Vav, 1825. And what's weird about it is, I don't know if you know about the Rebbe's Rishimis, the Rebbe's journal, which they published after Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe, in his journal, makes a mathematical cheshbon to prove that the 2 years in a row, Tafresh Pei Vav and Tafresh Pei Zayin, Tes Kislev was Shabbos and Yud Kislev was Sunday. Because this we know for sure, that the Mitteler Rebbe was saying Chassidus, and they wanted to tell him that he's free, and they waited till he finished, and that's why the Yom Tov becomes Yud Kislev. So both years, Pei Vav and Pei Zayin, the Kviyas of the days of the week is the same, and we're not sure, we're Pashat not sure, but again, the documents which were recently published, they found the 200-page file. About 30 years ago, Rabbi Bet Levin, who's an incredibly prolific man, he's the Rebbe's librarian, published in Hebrew a translation of a Russian file, a complete file of the Mitteler Rebbe's Rest Liberation, including many letters from the Mitteler Rebbe and others about the arrest, and it's very clear that he was released from prison 2 years before he passed away. So there's a strong connection between the Mitteler Rebbe's Rest Liberation and his Histalkos, as you'll see as the story unfolds. But before I get to that, there's one thing I need to share with you. And I'm going to say it to you the way I see it. The Eibishter gave me a chush. The Eibishter gave me a chush. I remember stories and I repeat them correctly and I repeat them in a way that's interesting. I'm not boring. If you tell a story correctly, it can be so technical, you know. The Eibishter gave me a chush. I try my best not to make stuff up. My memory is not nearly what I used to have a much better memory. But this is one of the things I do. I talk Siddish Shamaisis. It's a chush that I have. But what I read lately, I don't remember. If I read it 20 years ago, I remember it. If I read it 40 years ago, I can show you the page. What I read yesterday, I forgot already. Because the cup out of it, you get old. In the last few years, very recently, I read a book, which I should have read years ago, and I didn't, but I just read it now. It's called Sefer HaZachrenes Chelik Gimel. I hope you are aware of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's memoirs. Is there a girl in this room who's not heard of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's memoirs? If you have not heard of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's memoirs, please raise your hand. The Frierdiker Rebbe's. Every girl, have you heard of the Frierdiker Rebbe's memoirs, yes or no? Yes. You must read the Zechrenis, you must. It'll give you Ava V'yira, it'll give you God, fear of God and love of God. It's a very special Sforim. My grandfather was not a Lubavitcher, my mother's father. When my father married my mother, my father gave him a copy of the Zechrenis. My Zaidi told me he kept it on his night table till the day he died. He read it over and over and over again. Because my grandfather was not a chassid, was a very chassidish person. The Zechrenis is full of Yira Shamayim, full of Midas Tevis, every good thing that a person needs. Emunah, Yira Ave, gepackt in the Zechrenis. The Frierdiker Rebbe there was a man named David Leib Meckler. He was from, he was modern, he didn't have a beard. And he came from Lubavitch Chassidim from Russia. And he was an editor of a newspaper called the Tog, or the Morgen Journal. He met the Frierdiker Rebbe when the Rebbe came the first in 1929. He interviewed the Rebbe. He fell in love with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe sort of liked him back. It looks like the Rebbe liked him. And there's no doubt in my mind that part of that was he had Lubavitcher genes. You know, we're not into Gej, but it's not nothing. He had a feel for the Frierdiker Rebbe. So what the Rebbe used to do in America the second time was, the Rebbe used to write notes in Hebrew. The Frierdiker Rebbe in Hebrew. He would take the notes in Hebrew, which were cliff notes, they were outlines, and he would build out of those notes stories in Yiddish. And he would dramatize them. And he would publish them each week in the Morgen Journal. In other words, not every word in the Zechreinus the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote, it was called Rishimas Lubavitch. The memoirs of the Frierdiker Rebbe is not about Chabad Chassidus, it's about the city of Lubavitch, the city of brotherly love. And the Frierdiker Rebbe used to write in Hebrew, and David Meckler would get these notes, the Frierdiker would give it to him, and he would write it in Yiddish, but he wouldn't just translate it, he would dramatize it. And then after he wrote it up, he would give the Frierdiker Rebbe the Yiddish, and the Rebbe would make corrections. But it's not a truth to say that every single word in the previous Rebbe's memoirs is, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't write it. He wrote notes, and this David Meckler, he was a dramatic man, he was a writer, would dramatize it, and there's exaggerations in the Zechrenis.
Was it approved?
The Frierdiker Rebbe used to check it over, and he would correct it. But it's not Kodesh Kadoshim, it's just Kodesh, you know what I'm saying? It's not the Frierdiker Rebbe's words, it's not the Frierdiker Rebbe's Asich. And every week in the Morgen Journal, another chapter came out, and eventually they printed one volume. The first volume was printed during the Frierdiker Rebbe's lifetime in 1945. And the second volume was printed 10 years later in 1955, which is after the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. They printed the second volume of Zechrenis. I can't hear you.
The second volume?
No, it was printed in the newspaper when the Frierdiker Rebbe was alive. But they didn't get around to publishing it in a book till after. They didn't publish it after the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. They issued it as a sefer after the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. But the Rebbe knew, our Rebbe knew, that when the Rebbe was here in America the first time, in 1929, 1930, David Leib Meckler did the same thing. There were newspaper articles in 1929, 1930, every week, telling the history of Chabad, and the Rebbe wanted to get his hands on it. The Rebbe wanted to print them. And the Rebbe wrote letters, where are they? They couldn't find them. They found them after Gimel Tammuz, I think, or after Rav Zayin Oder. Now, it's the first version of the Zechrenis is very problematic because it doesn't tell the history of Lubavitch, it tells the history of Chabad. In other words, the two volumes of Lubavitch Rebbe memoirs that you know are talking about Lubavitch before the Rebbe moved there. It's talking about Lubavitch until Lubavitch was born. It goes back 400 years, 450 years, 350 years. It goes back to before Chassidus, to the Baal Shem Tov's times. The third volume of memoirs talks about the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab, and even the Frierdiker Rebbe. So it talks about history that we know from other sources, and there's many contradictions. It's hard to know how to reconcile the contradictions. Apparently, when the Rebbe came the first time, this man did not get his stories to the Frierdiker Rebbe directly, he got them from other people. So it's the kind of thing where the spirit of it is true, but not every word necessarily is true. But there's something very interesting about this history. For about a year, for about 10 months, every single week in a Yiddish paper, there'd be another essay on the history of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim, starting with the Alter Rebbe, through the Rebbe Rashab, and into the Frierdiker Rebbe. What's interesting about this book, that it's not the story of the Rebbeim. It's not. It doesn't talk so much about the Tanya, and about the Likutei Torah, and about the Mitteler Rebbe's Forum. It's really about the Askanus of the Rebbeim, which is a whole window. It's a unique subset of the lives of the Rebbeim. In other words, this volume of Zechrenis,
third volume.
It is translated in English. It's a very interesting read because it's not the history of Chabad per se. It's the history of the Rebbeim's Askanus. It's the history that shows that all the Lubavitcher Rebbeim, all of them, were not just holy rabbis who said Chassidus. They were very practical men who thought about Yidden, not just Yiddishkeit, Yidden in Russia, and took great steps to push it, physically help the Jewish people. It's a slice of Chabad. It's a unique slice. For me, It was very different because I'm into Chassidus. I'm not into Askanus. I'm not a shliach. I'm a teacher. So I don't value that so much, but it's really very important. But you see every Rebbe from the Alter Rebbe, besides for the Chassidus that they taught and the avodah that they inspired and the avodah that they did, they pushed word about Yidden in Russia, including pushed giving them jobs. The Rebbe Rashab built factories to find Yidden work. Pasha Kipshute. The Rabbeim did physical things using money and help that they got from other people, sometimes Yidden who were not from, to help Yidden in Russia. It was one of the things that Rabbeim did. And to me, the most compelling thing in this book was how much Askanus the Mitteler Rebbe did. Of all the Chabad Rabbeim, the one who was least in this world was the Mitteler Rebbe. I mean, the way I like to see it, the way I see it, all the Chabad Rabbeim brought Chassidus into the world. The Mitteler Rebbe took his Chassidim to Gan Eden. And the Mitteler Rebbe was the Rebbe for 15 years. It's a very short time. But the Mitteler Rebbe's Nesius was a whirlwind. It was like a storm. The Mitteler Rebbe was so powerful. He was so powerful. And he gave so much. He lifted his Chassidim, they were like Malachim. 15, and then he passed away. When the Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe to the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim, it was very anticlimactic because the Tzemach Tzedek was, quote, normal. A Maimer was 45 minutes, not 20 hours. The Mitteler Rebbe was mamash a whirlwind. And the Mitteler Rebbe himself was Chassidu Prish, he had no shachas. The Mitteler Rebbe did not know the value of money. He couldn't understand the difference between a 1 ruble note, a 5 ruble note, a 10 ruble note, a 20 ruble note, a 50 ruble note, and a 100 ruble note. He literally did not understand the value of money. He was so smart, but he couldn't come down that low. Push it. It's weird. But in this book, you find out that the Mitteler Rebbe did many things that were very practical to help Yidden in Russia. Many, many, many different things. He settled Chassidim in Kherson. He said Yidden. He was very down to earth in many, many ways. His Nesius was short, was 15 years. He passed away on his 54th birthday, which is not old, of course. But he accomplished an enormous amount during his short tenure as a Rebbe. But there was one thing that he himself said, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. And that's the Gezeir of the Cantonistim, the decree of the Cantonists. You know, there's an old cliche that says nostalgia is very romantic, you know. History is very beautiful. You know history is beautiful? Because it's not happening now. So you always hear this, the stories are so beautiful, you know. But they're not. Life is tough. If life is hard today, 150 years ago was 100 times harder. In Russia, with Lubavitch's, White Russia, which was a place, it used to be called Poland, the Russian government, they were pushed officially anti-Semites, anti-Semitic. The king of Russia, the Tsar, was a frum man, he was a Christ, he was a Christian guy. They were Eastern, they belonged to the Greek Eastern Church. They were not Catholics, but they were not Protestants either. They belonged to the Eastern Church. And they had a deep hatred for Jews, a religious hatred. And at every turn, they made tzaras for Yidden. One of the most famous tzaras, and it's truly a tzara that leiksul b'Torah, you have no idea how terrible it is they made what's called Tchum HaMoishav. They made the Pale of Settlements. Jews came into Russia and they began to settle Russia. You know what happens when the Jews come to a place? Overnight, there's business. Jews are just capable. But they started doing commerce and they started to make money, started to succeed, and the government got jealous. And they made rules where Yidden could live. I talked about this recently in a different class. They made rules. You can't live here, you can only live here. And Yidden had to move. And had to move their families and their businesses. You can't move the real estate. So the Goyim took advantage. These tzaras, the Pale of Settlements, Exeros to Mamoishev, it's an unimaginable thing. Imagine thousands and thousands of Yidden who are living in a place, they have homes, they have jobs, they have businesses, they have communities, and they have 3 months to move. If the house is worth $100,000, the Goy is going to give them $5,000, not a penny more. Why? Because they can't stay. They became destitute. You're not talking about 2 or 3 Jews, you're talking about thousands of Yidden. And every 50 years, they changed the borders. They would change the tchum. They made a place the Jews are allowed to live, and then 50 years, no, you can't live here, and they had to again move. The rishes, the cruelty of this. You know, the Rebbe once said to Branover, Branover, Yirmiyah Branover was a Zangesund, said to the Rebbe, we printed a sefer in the old printing house in Vilna from the times of the Tsar. And the Rebbe said, from the times of the Tsar, you don't have to mention the Tsar. We had plenty tzaddis from the Tsar. In other words, don't think that the Soviet Union was mean to the Jews and the Tsar was nice to the Jews. They were the shoyim gemura. The Gezer of the Tchum HaMoshe was a cruel, cruel decree. It was a nasty trick. They would let the Jews settle and then succeed and then kick them out and take their homes and businesses, and the Jews would start over every 50 years. By the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, they made the first pale of settlements. By the Rebbe Marash, they made the second pale of settlements. And it was life in Russia for Jews was extraordinarily hard, exceedingly hard. And the Rabbeim bled for them. The Rabbeim couldn't sleep. The Rabbeim helped as much as they could. But another Gezerah, which is almost as sinister, was what they call the Tzadke Soldat, the Gezerah of the Cantonists. The official story is that Jews avoided serving in the Russian army. Of course they avoided the Russian army. What did they lose? What, Russia didn't love them. They're going to fight and die for Russia. Especially since in Russia, most soldiers didn't even fight. You had to serve. 3 years, you had to have a mandatory draft. And to be from in the Russian army was impossible. Yidden were not looking for trouble, not interested. And they held it against the Jews. How come they don't serve? So they made a gzeira that a certain percentage of Jewish boys are going to be given 25 years of training in the Russian army, and then they're going to begin their service. In other words, you're going to be what they call a career military person. Your whole life you're going to be in the military. You have that in America. I mean, America doesn't have a very big army right now. It's not wartime. America, during the Second World War, made conscription. We made a draft. During the First World War, we made conscription. But otherwise, it's a volunteer army. If you serve in the American army today, you're a volunteer. Now, some people join the army for 3 years because they want to get a college education, because they want to get out of a bad situation, you want to go out of your community. People have all kinds of reasons why they join the military. And of course, they all hope there's not going to be any wars. Because if there's wars, you can actually get killed, right? But if you serve in the army and you train for 3 years and it gets you a free college education, it was worth it. But then you have career military people who have generations, their whole life, they grow up, they join the army and they serve and they go up in rank. They spend their entire lives. And they took Yidden, boys, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. 25 years was training. 25 years was training. So the training finishes when they're in their early 30s. And then their career as soldiers starts, it goes into their 50s. They're called the Cantonistim. And the Tzemach Tzedek dealt with that. The Tzemach Tzedek, the death of the Cantonistim happened some point in the late 1820s. The Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe in 1828. Somewhere, I don't know the exact dates. I mean, you could probably look it up online. And it went through the Nesiyas of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek passed away in 1866. The Gezerah was winding down already at that time, but many Yidden continued to serve. If you were drafted before, they continued to serve till the end of their terms. The story of the Cantonistim is tragic. Thousands and thousands of boys, not men, were ripped out of their homes before Bar Mitzvah and put into barracks. Officially they were given kosher. Officially they were allowed to daven. But they would torture them for it. They would punish them. They wanted, one of the reasons they made this Gezerah, the king who did it was one of the biggest Rishonim in history, Nikolai I. Nikolai. Was a Rosh HaMerusha. His kavanah was they should all become baptized, Rahman as Christians. The Tzemach Tzedek said that all the Cantonistim will die by the tshuva, and that's what happened. Many of them were killed. Many of them died al Kiddush Hashem. When they were forced to baptize themselves, they'd go into the river and they would go dunk and they wouldn't pump up. They would push it drown. They would drown themselves. Nitzaver and Kristen. It was a terrible, terrible decree. The decree started during the lifetime of the Mitteler Rebbe, and the Mitteler Rebbe said, "Ich kenn das nicht." The Mitteler Rebbe dealt with plenty of tzaddas, trust me. But when this one came down the pike, the Mitteler Rebbe said, "This one I can't handle." And he literally passed away and left it for the Tzemach Tzedek. And the same thing happened by the Rebbe Rashab. When the communists came into Rostov, the Rebbe Rashab said, "Ich ken mit zeinen seinen einem, I can't be with them." The Rebbe Rashab passed away before his time. The Frierdiker Rebbe said it. And he left the Soviet Gezerah to the Rebbe Rayatz. But the same is true of the Mitteler Rebbe and the Cantonistim. And this is a story that I want to start today's class with. There's a sefer called Migalois, which is it's published now it's published 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. No, 45 years ago. It's a hodgepodge. It's a cholent. It's a big book with tons of material. It was prepared by a chassid who was a very, very big choikir. His name was Rabbi Munshine, Rabbi Shia Munshine. And he published it, Ilonishmas, his grandfather, whose name was Azriel Zelig Slonim. Migdal Oiz is Rosh Tevis, Ayin Zayin, Azriel Zelig. And it's all kinds of stuff that he collected from the libraries in Eretz Yisrael. And in these libraries, you have documents about the Mitteler Rebbe's life that were written in real time. In other words, people, Chassidim, wrote stuff down about the Mitteler Rebbe as it was happening, and they sent them to Eretz Yisrael, and the documents were preserved. They're now held in a museum in Yerushalayim. He was the bibliothèque of this library, had access to these manuscripts, and he published a lot of very interesting things about the Mitteler Rebbe from these original documents. I don't think the Rebbe even had them. And in these documents, there's an account of the Mitteler Rebbe's passing away. And part of the story is the following: the Mitteler Rebbe said, that there was once a fabrengen, the Mitteler Rebbe said, and I was sitting with Chassidim, and we were fabrenging, and we were very happy. You have to understand what it means by the Mitteler Rebbe. These were people who davened all day long. These were people who could think Chassidus for hours. They lived in a holy world. Their pleasure was not ice cream. Their pleasure was a lakus. Their pleasure, they ate a little kashe with the l'chaim, but they lived in they were godly, holy. The Mitteler Chassidim didn't live here. They lived here. And he had hundreds like that. Hundreds of Chassidim that were Bali Madrega Nailis B'Yeser. So the Mitteler Rebbe said that we had a fabrengen, and we're sitting with Chassidim, and we're all very, very happy. Because we were sitting together, we mishtasheh with divrei Teira, with divrei Dach, divrei Lakim Chayim, they're talking Pnimis HaTeira, Chassidus, Alakus, and suddenly I see my father, the Mitteler Rebbe, suddenly I see my father. And my father, the Alter Rebbe, says to me, why are you so happy? She said, why am I so happy? I'm sitting with Chassidim. We're speaking divrei Lakim Chayim, Chassidus, Pnimis HaTeira. We're mishtasheh and divrei Lakim Chayim. We're fabringing together. Why shouldn't I be happy? It's like Gan Eden. So the Alter Rebbe says, you don't know? L'maila was decreed that there's going to be a new Gzeira in Russia. And they're going to take away children to serve in the Russian army for 25 years. Why are you happy? And the Alter Rebbe disappeared. So the Mitteler Rebbe writes, I became very depressed. I became very bitter. The thought, 25 years, take Russian kinderlach, Yiddish kinderlach from homes. And some of these people, some of the Rabbeim's children, some of the Rabbeim's kids, own kids were drafted into this Gzeira. It wasn't something that happened to other people, For 25, and the Mitteler Rebbe very, very bitter, very depressed. But then the Mitteler Rebbe continues, but time passed and the Gzeira didn't happen. So I thought I forgot about it. 7 years passed. 7 years passed. And again there was a fabrengen, and again I was sitting with Chassidim, and again I was in a very happy mood. I was sitting with Chassidim, we were speaking divrei Lakim Chayim, Chassidus, Pnimis HaTeira, Lakus. And I see my father. And my father says to me, why are you so happy? He says, why am I happy? I'm sitting with Chassidim, we're speaking Pnimis HaTeira, Mishtasheh and Lakus, why shouldn't I be happy? He says, I told you that there's a Gzeira L'maila that Jewish children are going to be drafted into the Russian army to serve for 25 years. So the Mitteler Rebbe says to his father, but so much time passed, I thought the Gzeira was bottled. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, the Gzeira is very much alive and well. It's going to happen. Why are you so happy? So again, the Mitteler Rebbe went to a dika on. And of course, the end of that story was that the Mitteler Rebbe said, Ich ken das nicht, I can't handle this. And he passed away. Passed away. And Mitteler Rebbe went to his father's cave in Haditch, and he came out and he said, the Tata hat been abgesagt from the Rabbonos. My father freed me from the Rabbonos. He was 53. And everybody was thinking that he was going to move to Eretz Yisrael. Lepoil on his 54th birthday, he didn't even make it back to Lubavitch. He got sick, and he passed away in Nezhin, Vishom, and Uchasikov. The Mitteler Rebbe was buried in Nezhin. And he left it for the Tzemach Tzedek. The Gzeira, the cantonist, started during the very last period of the Mitteler Rebbe's life, but the Tzemach Tzedek had to deal with it. And Tzemach had all kinds of movements. That Achavet Chiyas HaMeis, they would literally sneak, they would go into these barracks and steal the kids out. Steal them. And then they would make puppet matzevis. They would say the kid got sick and he died, and they put up a tombstone, and they would put the kid's name on it. And the kid was sent to live in somebody's house. So they would come from the government, they would dig up the graves. And the graves were empty. So they would make a vayitzako and they would arrest people and they would kill you for this. This was treason. So what they would do is, if a Jewish boy died in a city, they didn't put his name on the matzeva. Any Jewish boy who died, it was an excuse to save a kid from the army. They would take a kid who actually was serving, they'd put his name on that matzeva, and when they would dig up the grave, there was a body. But it wasn't that kid, it was another, you understand? And the Chassidim Chassidim were killed in Russia for helping try to save the kids from the Gzeda went on for 40 years. It was a terrible Gzeda. But the Mitteler Rebbe said, I can't handle it. But there is a maimer. There's a printed maimer. Today all memoirs of Mitteler Rebbe are printed in a set called Memoirs Admor Emtzoi. There's one volume called Memoirs Admor Emtzoi Cantonistim. In this sefer you have a maimer lahov and inyan lekichas anshe chayil mebnei Yisrael. What is the meaning of taking Yiddish kindlach to serve? It's a long maimer. The maimer gets very intense. It's very painful. And part of what's written in the maimer is that sometimes Yidden become complacent. They're frum, but they're like laissez-faire, they're not too frum. And the Eibush is not sure if they value Yiddishkeit or not. So he tests them to see if they mean it. He tightens the screws. And the Mitteler said, that's the pshat. The reason kids are being drafted is because Yidden in Russia, life is very good. They're all having a very good life. And the Eibush wants to see if we take care about his Torah mitzvahs. In 1964, Tafshin Chav Daled, Pashas Yisrei, there were 3 guests by the Rebbe, Mendel Futterfass, Zalman Jaffe, and Fola Khan. The Rebbe said a Chassid who came from Russia a long time ago, a Chassid who came from Russia recently, and a Chassid who was never in Russia. The Fabrengen revolved around these 3 personalities. Fola Khan, that's Abiel Khan's father, and a Mendel who had just come from Russia a year before, or a few months before, and then Zalman Jaffe, Zalman Lichting Gan Eden. And in that Fabrengen, the Rebbe said this maimer. He started with David Amaskal said the maimer about the idea that sometimes the Eibush tests Yidden to see if we're sincere. And the Rebbe said at some point the Eibush should know that we mean it's enough. He told the Eibush that you don't stop testing us. A while back, I forgot when it was, something happened, and people were quoting that maimer. Nitlain Tzedek at Chabad. Maybe COVID. This maimer. I mean, people say whatever they want, but you have to be a Rebbe to explain events in the world. But the Mitteler Rebbe actually said a maimer explaining the Cantonists. But he said, I can't handle it. He passed away.
What was the maimer that Rebbe said? What was the Dibra Maslow?
I don't know. Yisrei Tashchavdal. You can look the maimer up. I don't know the Dibra Maslow.
But the Yidden in Russia didn't have a good life.
Bechlal didn't have a good life, and this made it even worse.
So
Akashas Nebishten. Akashas Nebishten.
And why is because they were having too good of a life?
Ich weiß nicht. I don't know what to tell you. And the war with Napoleon wasn't enough. You know what Napoleon did to Russia?
What's the Mitteler Rebbe talking about?
I don't know. I'm telling you what he said, not what he meant. I don't know. That's what he said. So this is one parsha, the parsha of the Cantonistim, which didn't really happen by the Mitteler Rebbe, but it starts by the Mitteler Rebbe. And the other parsha is the parsha of the Mitteler Rebbe's arrest. The Mitteler Rebbe's arrest is a stupid story. It really is. Anytime you arrest a Rebbe, it's a stupid story. Why are you arresting a Rebbe? A Rebbe that's Tzaddik Gomer, Ishal Lakim Kaddish. What kind of Aveda did he do? What was that Aveda? So the Alter Rebbe was arrested by Misnagdim. They didn't like the fact that he was maybe from Yanis Chutza. They didn't like Chassidus Bechlal, so they arrested him. The Friedrich Rebbe went to jail because of Sektia. The Friedrich went to jail not because of communists, because of Jewish communists. The Evreis Sektia, the Friedrich Rebbe's daughters came from Jews who were trying to destroy Yiddishkeit. That was the truth of the matter. Why was the Mitteler Rebbe arrested? Well, the answer is good old extortion. You know what extortion means? It's like the mafia. Right? You have a store on Kingston Avenue, you come one day and your window is smashed. And a guy walks and says, your window is smashed, there must be trouble around. He says, I will charge you $50 a week to protect your store. Now he smashed your window, you understand? If you give him the $50 a week, it's good. Anish, the next day your store burns to the ground. So you pay the $50, it's a still, shalom Yisrael, it's extortion. It's called a racket, it's gneva. And the mafia made a living like that. They would extort every business. Everyone paid taxes to the mafia, so they shouldn't burn your business down. And of course the government sat and watched. The government is supposed to stop the mafia, but the mafia was stronger than the government. They paid off all the government people. Extortion is you take a person's money because you could. That's the only reason. The Mitteler Rebbe, the Chlal, the Nasias of the Mitteler Rebbe was the time there was not a lot of money around. People were very poor. The Rebbe once said in the Fabreng, I heard it myself, that the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim seinen gewähren Orem, Alachas kama v'kama, the Chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. The Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were poor, and the Chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe were poorer. Alachas kama v'kama, the Chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. But the Mitteler Rebbe, Bechlal the Chabad Rebbeim, they had an hug of they didn't necessarily live rich. The Reb Marash lived rich, but they lived comfortably. They lived balabatish. And the Mitteler Rebbe had a hanhaga that was ganz breit. His hanhaga was harchovedik. He didn't waste money, but there was a way. There was a Rebbish style of living. He had horses. He had a choir and an orchestra. The Mitteler Rebbe had Fashidin and Yonim. He also raised enormous amounts of money to support a yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. The Alter Rebbe said, "Chassidus the Mitteler Rebbe live in Yisrael." So did the Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe sent his relative. The people live in Eretz Yisrael. He raised a lot of money. He spent a lot of money. And there were people who decided that it would be nice if they got a piece of that pie. Why? Why not? It's called extortionists. Why should I work for money? You'll work for the money. I'll take some of yours. How am I going to take some of yours? I'm come listen. If you don't give me so many dollars, I'm going to go to the government and I'm going to masa kach v'kach, and the government is of course going to believe me because I'm going to make up fake documents and false witnesses, and they can put you in jail and you can have embarrassments and it costs you money. It's cheaper and easier for you to give you the few dollars that I'm asking, and Shalom Yisrael. That's exactly what happened to the Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe was approached by people who belonged to two groups, and it's really upset even to say. Number one, his own family. His own mishpacha. You have to remember that the Alter Rebbe's mother's family were big misnagdim. Alter Rebbe's wife, the Mitteler Rebbe's mother's family. Alter Rebbe's wife had a bonus at Cantonistim standing there. Her family was very rich. Her father's name was Yehuda Leib Segel. He was a nugget. He was a very rich man. They lost all their money. They rebuilt their business. But some of the members of that family became very close to Chabad, to the Rebbeim, and some remained angry and bitter. And they decided that the Mitteler Rebbe has to give a kickback, or they're gonna hurt him. They're gonna massa. And they joined forces with another group. Who was the other group? Inchad Lemai. The whole story is a billboard from the beginning to the end. In other words, they were not even fighting about principle. Misnagdim felt Chassidus was wrong. They were trying to destroy Chassidus because they believed it was against Yiddishkeit. By the Mitteler Rebbe was Pashat Gelt from the beginning to the end. Who was the second group? The second group was the relatives of a chassid by the name of the Pinchas Reizes. The Rebbe had a chassid with him, the Pinchas Reizes. His last name was Shik, and he came from Shklov, so he has three last names, like a good Jew, you know. Pinchas Shik, Pinchas Shklov, and Pinchas Reizes. Shik was his last name, Shklov was his city, and Reizes was the name of his mother-in-law. Now, why would a chassid be called by a mother-in-law's name? Her name was Reiza, or Shoshana in Hebrew. She was very wealthy. And when Alter Rebbe came to Shklov, she saw the Alter Rebbe and she was so impressed. Shklov was a very misnagdish city. After Vilna was the strongest misnagdish city. She said to any one of her son-in-laws that goes to the Alter Rebbe, she's going to give them a huge amount of her fortune. So several shvagis went to the Alter Rebbe and they became his chassidim. There was Pinchas Reizes and there was Zalman Reizes. They were brothers-in-law. They married to two sisters. They both carried the name of their mother-in-law because she made him into a chassid. The Pinchas Reizes went to the Alter Rebbe because of his shviga, because of his mother-in-law. But he became a very big chassid. He is the chassid who would roll on the floor together with the Alter Rebbe to hear every word the Alter Rebbe said. We have a nachas. The Pinchas Reizes brought my mother with the Alter Rebbe word for word. The Alter Rebbe, they trusted him. Pinchas Reizes was considered a very special chassid. Pinchas Reizes was a big Baal Madrege, who was a big chassid, and a big oived, also a very big oisha, was very, very wealthy. And he gave tons of tzedakah. The Pinchas Reizes had one problem. He never had any children. And he begged the Alter Rebbe, he begged. The Alter Rebbe said to him, I can give you everything in the world, I can't give you this. Alter Rebbe used to say to him, when you daven, you make so many Baalei Tshuva. They're all your ruchniistic children. He said, I want a biological child, right? Avraham Avinu says, I want a child. And the Alter Rebbe said, End of the story was that Pinchas Reizes passed away childless. Now he should have left a fortune. He was a very rich man. So as they say in English, the vultures were circling. They couldn't wait for his body to become room temperature. His nephews and his nieces, they were all waiting for him to die. And they were going to jump down on the Sierra Basar and they were going to divide their wealth. And they found not a penny. He gave away everything he had to tzedakah. They found receipts, lots of receipts. Nishka penny. And the vast majority, that money was given to the Mitteler Rebbe. He was a big chassid, a groise oisher. He gave the Mitteler Rebbe huge amounts of money, and the Mitteler Rebbe used it for his inyanim. So they came together with the Mitteler Rebbe's mishpacha to blackmail the Mitteler Rebbe. It says, we're entitled, we're relatives, and it's not fair that he gave the money to you. Should have left it for us. So give us a piece. And they gave him a percent, whatever they wanted. It was a lot of money, but it probably wasn't half. It was a percentage. And the Mitteler Rebbe says, this is stuck. It's not my money. They went with stuck to support that Yisrael, to support the colonies in Cherson, the different tzedakahs. The Mitteler Rebbe did a lot of things. He needed a lot of money. And the Pinchas Reis gave him some of that money. And the Mitteler Rebbe, I can't give you a penny, it's not mine, it's stuck. So they told the Mitteler Rebbe, if you don't give us money, we're going to maser. We're going to inform. And the Mitteler Rebbe said, gate 5 from I'm not giving you a dime. So they made a mesira against the Mitteler Rebbe. The whole thing was concocted. It had no basis in emes. But they developed a whole theory, a whole conspiracy against the Mitteler Rebbe. And Bechlal, I don't know if you know this, Russians by nature are paranoid. The Russian anti-Semites, paranoia towards Yidden is pi kama v'kama. And they wanted to believe it. In America, there's a system which is called innocent till proven guilty. But in Soviet Russia, in Tsarist Russia, it was guilty till proven innocent. Someone made a masira. The first thing that the Alter Rebbe was arrested the first time. You know that? Alter Rebbe was arrested the first time. The Russian government didn't even know why. They got a letter from a man whose name was Hirsch ben Baruch, I think. And Ad Hayom Hazeh, we don't know who he is. Today's day, 250 years later, we don't know who he was. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he said, by the way, do you know Hirsch ben Baruch from Vilna? I never met the man. They arrested the Alter Rebbe because they got a letter from an anonymous man who may not have existed, who wrote that the Alter Rebbe is doing this Aveda. The first thing was they arrested him. Then they had to find out if it's true. Yeah. That's Russia. This is what happened to Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe was taken in. They arrested him based on the Mesira. Now, I don't have time to have home. I'm just doing one thing. I got 2 more minutes. You can start fidgeting at 12:30, okay? I got 2 more minutes I'm entitled to. And that's why I like the doors open, because the other girls disturb us. When the Alter Rebbe passed away, thank you. When the Alter Rebbe passed away, there was nothing in the house. Every penny they had went to pay for the travel. They ran away from Napoleon. Alter Rebbe burnt his house to the ground. And he ran deep into Russia. When the war was over, the Alter Rebbe had with him his entire family. Him and his wife and all his married children and their children. Alter Rebbe was supporting his entire family. You were talking, I think, of 60 people. And they had no homes, and they had no money, and did no community, and did no jobs. They were running. So the Mitteler Rebbe did what a lot of Rebbes used to do. It was called Foreign Ibn de Medina. The Mitteler Rebbe went from city to city. He came to each city, and he stayed a day or two, or a week or two. He said Chassidus. He took people to Yechidus, and people gave him money. It was a way of a Rebbe raising funds. And the Mitteler Rebbe raised 35,000 ruble. 35,000 ruble. Could you close the door, please? At 1 minute, I'll let you go. He raised 35,000 ruble. When he raised this money, he made a committee of people to distribute. Tzedakah has to be collected by more than one person and has to be given out. One person is not allowed to oversee a tzedakah by himself. He had a committee of people. And they found a letter in the Pinchas Reis' estate where the Mitteler Rebbe writes, I raised 35,000 ruble and I already gave out a quarter. I want you to know that in this book of documents that they published, they write exactly who got how much money. One family got 500 ruble, one family got, depending on how many children you had. He gave the money out to all the Alter Rebbe's children in Einiklach, including the Tzemach Tzedek. 500 ruble, he raised 35,000 ruble, which is an enormous amount of money, and he distributed to all the members of the Alter Rebbe's family, they should start their lives. But the way the letter is written, it can be translated in 2 ways. Number one, I raised 35,000 ruble and I gave out a quarter. Number two, I raised a lot of money and I gave out a quarter, which was 35,000 ruble. Now, if you read it the second way, that means the Mitteler Rebbe raised 140,000 ruble. 140,000 ruble in 1814, after the war with Napoleon, meant that every Jew in Russia had to literally cut his arm and give him his blood. It was impossible. And it was a lie. It wasn't true. He raised 35. But they took the wording and they played with it. And they came along and they presented Russia with a case that the Mitteler Rebbe in 1814 raised 140,000 ruble from the people in Russia to make him and his family comfortable. And that was the basis of the Mesira. There's more to it, and I'll talk about it on Thursday with the next group.